we think about leaders, we put leaders on these great training courses, we really coach them in their roles, but the middle managers don't get that support, they don't get that attention, and they are the ones who have the power to really create those great experiences. Your manager's responsible for helping you grow. If you've got an issue outside of work and inside work, you go to your manager. They're there to help motivate you, keep you engaged. And if they can't, or they're not doing that, or they need support, then your culture and all the things you're doing really well might fall apart.
Chelsea, hello.
Hello, thanks for having me.
No, thank you for joining me as a guest. I'm really excited to get into our topic, which for today is all about talking about middle managers, which we were talking earlier, how they don't always get the light on them. And today we're really going to dig into it. But before we do, there's one question that I ask every single guest. And I know you're a listener of our podcast, so you hopefully have a really good answer. I can't wait to hear it. But the question is, was HR part of the plan, or did this happen by chance?
So I think I'm probably one of the few guests where it was part of the plan, but it wasn't a straightforward path. So I did a degree in history. Obviously, when you're that age, making life decisions, you're too young to do. And I was coming up to the end of my degree and had no idea what I was going to do. And I remember going to a career advisor, and I'd spoke about how I wanted to go into border security. Really random, but I think I'd watched too many episodes of Nothing to Declare. And when we were actually talking about it, I was like, oh yeah, maybe that's not for me. And she was like, what about HR? I thought, oh yeah, that sounds like something I'm interested in. But it was that age-old scenario where I couldn't get a job because I didn't have experience, and I couldn't get experience because I didn't have a job. So I decided to make the most of the opportunities that I had. So I was working for a retailer, and I'd worked there since I was 16. And I thought, you know what? How can I create HR experiences within that? So when they were recruiting for their Christmas temps, I was like, I'll lead the recruitment evening. When we onboarded them, I was like, I'll do the really boring intro videos and put them on the system, the things that the store managers really didn't want to do. And then I ended up managing to get some work experience at the place I'm at now, and I've been there for 12 years, and I just loved it. Unfortunately, they couldn't give me a job at the time, so I went back, and then they called me a couple of months later and said, oh, we've got a job in our client services team. And even though it wasn't the job I wanted, I just loved the company so much, and I was like, yes, I'll take it. And then from there, I slowly started just taking on more of the people responsibilities. So they were having difficulty with recruitment. I was like, I'll do it.
Yes, love that.
I was just helping in all different teams. So I became an operations coordinator, and I was helping the sales team, finance team, the performance teams, and slowly chipping away to do more people stuff. But I think in the end, it's been a great journey because it's really helped me understand the business and the people policies and practices I put in place in terms of what people actually do and how it fits in. So it wasn't a straight path, but we got there in the end.
And it sounds like working in the other operations of the organisation really helped you actually within your current role to then understand the business. And I know quite a lot of organisations, as part of, especially large ones, as part of their onboarding, they actually get their team to work in other teams so that they can really understand how they work. So did you find it beneficial being part of sales, being quite part of the service team to help you into your HR role now?
Oh, definitely. And I think it helps everything from when you're recruiting people, onboarding them, because you've got some sort of experience in what they do and can understand it much more like in the context of what they do, rather than HR being something completely separate and maybe a bit like, oh, HR's over here. It's like, actually, these are the things we do to help you and we understand what you do. So yeah, definitely.
The start of your career is really inspiring. And I know that a lot of our listeners will hear your story and think about, okay, my journey hasn't been as linear and maybe I've struggled to get into an HR role. But where you are now as the head of people, they will definitely take inspiration from that. And that's also what I really want to focus on for today's topic. And what brought us to where we are now and how I found you through LinkedIn is because of Tomorrow being placed on the Great Place to Work in the UK, which is a huge testament to you for the people strategy. And I know when we originally spoke, you mentioned that middle managers are part of your people strategy. And I'd absolutely love if we can really hone in on them today and shine light on them in the way that they deserve to be. So why is enabling middle managers part of your strategy at Tomorrow?
Oh, big question to start with. But I think genuinely they are the foundation to the culture that you build. So you could have the most amazing culture as an overarching company. You could do all the things right, but middle managers have the power of creating subcultures, and they could either create a really positive experience in your workplace or a really negative one. So you can have an organization where 70, no, more than that, like 90% of, people are having great experience, but those other 10%, because of their managers, intentionally or unintentionally, might not. And I think, I was speaking to an HR colleague recently, and he said, your manager is the topic of your dinner time conversation. And I was like, it's so true. And I really feel like middle managers are often forgotten in strategies. We think about leaders, we put leaders on these great training courses, we really coach them in their roles, but the middle managers don't get that support, they don't get that attention, and they are the ones who have the power to really create those great experiences. Your manager's responsible for helping you grow. If you've got an issue outside of work and inside work, you go to your manager. They're there to help motivate you, keep you engaged. And if they can't, or they're not doing that, or they need support, then your culture and all the things you're doing really well might fall apart. And then lastly, I think they have such a difficult job. Like, they've got all these pressures. We often talk about them being the squeezed middle, and it's so true. They've got pressures from clients or from above. They've got pressures from their direct reports. They've got their own pressures, like they're trying to succeed in their careers. And I really think we have to support them to create those great cultures.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because you're absolutely right. They are squeezed between strategy and delivery at the same time. And very often they don't get any sort of investment or training for them to succeed, which translates then into the experience that we're creating for our people. Because if I think of me personally, I've been most influenced by the type of manager that I have had. They have enabled me to thrive, or on the latter, haven't enabled me to thrive. But I think it goes back to what are we doing as organizations to invest in our middle managers rather than leaving them to then be the translators of our strategy when potentially they're not clear on the strategy themselves.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And I think HR in itself has really tried to fight to have a seat at the table for a long time and, be seen as having the core people strategy. And there's still loads of work of bringing the business strategy and the people strategy together. So if we're still working on that, how can we expect managers to then translate that strategy too and put that into practice? So, our pillars at Tomorrow are personal growth, diversity and inclusion, and talent attraction, and then inspiring managers and leaders. And we focus so much on that pillar because they have the impact on all the others. So all the things we put in place for the other pillars are only going to succeed if they're applied and implemented and embedded and nurtured by our managers. So that to me is the most important pillar because everything else feeds into that.
And what impact have you seen by prioritizing that pillar?
So lots of really good benefits. And I think for me, the most personal success or the biggest success of prioritizing that is, as HR professionals, people come to you with a problem and then you say, have you spoken to that person about it?
Yeah.
And the answer's no. And you're like, okay, well, maybe we should start there. So some of the benefits we've seen is now if I ask them that question, the first response is if I've tried, or no, not yet, but I just wanted to get some help with how I should approach that. And for me, that is such a success because managers are now being proactive, asking for help rather than reactive. I never want to be or have an HR team where we're only pulled in when things have got really bad. And then secondly, thinking about more business metrics, we've lowered our turnover rate. We were featured in top 10 of great places to work again, which is amazing. We slipped down a little while, but we're back up there. Our business has grown. Our client retention has grown. Our client happiness has grown. So we've got those results that show that having changed our strategy, our focus, it's paid off for our business.
Amazing statistics. And again, with where you're being placed with Great Place to Work, it shows that what you're doing is working. And by prioritizing the middle managers, it's having a ripple effect on the entire organization. What I really hear sometimes is a misconception around middle managers, and they're not seen for the value that they genuinely bring to an organization. They dictate the tone, the psychological safety, the communication and accountability within teams. Yet a lot of organizations don't prioritize their middle management. And what I also hear, and I don't know if you agree with this or you have any examples, is when a business is scaling, they struggle to see the middle management layer as a benefit to their organization because they can't charge for their time because they spend around 60% of their time managing people. And it goes back to that squeeze of being responsible for strategy and then delivery as well. Did you have that whilst you were scaling tomorrow? And how did you overcome building that middle management layer?
Oh, so it's been a journey and it's still a journey, but we learnt the hard way, I think, because we didn't prioritize that layer. And we went through some difficult moments where perhaps we lost some of our key talent, where perhaps our culture wasn't scaling as it had been. We've always focused on our culture, which has been a really important thing for us. But going from 25 people to 80 to 100, then back down and back up again, we lost sight of the impact of those middle managers. And that's why now a lot of my time is spent supporting those managers because in the end, it pays off. And it's really important.
And what steps have you taken to support those middle managers now that it's a real priority for you in your role?
So one of the things we changed is having more ongoing training. So we have workshops once a week, not once a week, oh my gosh, that would be too much, once a month. We have workshops once a month. We have bi-monthly, monthly catch-ups with myself to have that space for reflection. So I'm a big believer that in order to be a really great manager or a great leader, is that self-awareness is key because you have the impact to, like I said before, create that positive or negative experience. And a lot of people maybe don't realize that significant impact that they have on individuals, the impact that their behavior has, their language, their actions. They've gone for being responsible for themselves, for doing a good job, to now being responsible for others, and also having this additional role where they are responsible for creating those subconscious and maybe haven't quite had that connection between their role in that and their behaviors. So one of the key things I encourage in those catch-ups that I have with them is creating that space for self-reflection, creating that space to talk about the things that come up or are coming up for them. And like I said before, they've got their own pressures. Like, they want to succeed in their careers, and they might not want to go to their manager to say, I'm having trouble with these things, because they don't want to look like they can't do it. And so I think creating that space, creating the tools to help them within their roles. One of the things we found in our employee experience survey is we had a section on line management, and we scored 5 out of 5 for that. People loved their managers. We had these great scores. But then you looked at how often do they receive feedback? It was lower. Do you know how your performance is measured? Lower. And that connection wasn't being made. Actually, those things are what managers are responsible for. So we need to create the tools to help them. So again, going back to that journey, they are now responsible for someone's progression. How do they articulate what good performance looks like? If someone's asking them for, what do I need to do to get promoted? How do they articulate those things, those behaviors? So things like creating a career framework for us had been really helpful to help them articulate those things, give them that framework to use. We also, and I guess this comes back to that painful journey, or those moments that we might have had, is I've learned a lot from that journey also. So I think it was maybe 2018, yeah. I decided to take the radical approach of removing annual appraisals, any forms. I wanted these great conversations. Yeah, I wanted these great conversations. I wanted it to, people have those coaching conversations, these great things, but that wasn't happening. And it is a real light bulb moment for me that I need to meet managers where they're at and support them. So we brought back forms, but in a different way. They were reflective questions to steer the conversation. One of the first questions I have on the form was, what would you like to get out of this conversation, to help managers prepare? So if they know that someone's going to ask them for a pay rise or what progression looks like, or feedback, it gives the manager that time to prepare and make sure that that conversation is valuable. So those tools. We also have some external support. So we partner with Aliva, which is mental health therapy and professional coaching, because sometimes they might not want to talk to someone internally. There's also lots of self-directed content. So for us, it's really about ongoing. And another key thing for me is that there are so many amazing manager training programs now. So many I would recommend, of people that I really respect and admire, and it's very progressive approach. And I would definitely recommend those for people. But what happens after? You might cover something 6 months ago at that training, and then now you're faced with it. Can you remember? You need someone to chat through that scenario.
Which goes back then to having the catch-ups with yourself when you're talking about that, keeping that regular momentum and that safe space for managers to come to you. Because I see that all the time. Companies invest in huge management trainings, which is great in the moment. But how are we keeping momentum with that? How are we still enabling our managers and really flexing on that muscle to keep going? Because it isn't just a one-time thing. When you move into a management career, it is a whole career change.
Yeah.
it's so much different than just being promoted. There's nothing just about it. When you
Yeah.
become a manager, it's really hard, really hard. And I've struggled with that. I went from being really great at what I did as an individual contributor to now being responsible for those who now do the job that I used to do. And I'm setting the tone and I'm setting them up for success. But how was I supposed to know how to keep that momentum when I wasn't having those conversations anymore?
Yeah. And I think it's so there's so many like micro moments that no one's ever going to train you about. Like going from being an individual contributor with your friends to then managing them.
Yeah.
You know,
So
that's
true.
a whole different transition that you don't go on a training course to learn, like, how do I conduct myself in front of people who were once my friends? How do I go out for drinks with people? And
I find more often than not, it's based on that learning comes with time
yeah,
and dipping your toe in, potentially failing, overcoming that really quickly and learning, and then potentially leaning on other managers in the organization to ask them for feedback. Like, how did you overcome this? Can you share knowledge in this situation? We don't get any training for those micro moments.
yeah. And it's amazing, really, because there's nothing you can do really to prepare for them. And that's why I think the catch ups are so important because, you know, I don't care if 90% of those catch ups or 95% of those catch ups are just r- random stuff,
Yeah.
you know, that comes up. But that time they need me, that relationship is there so that I will make time for them. We will talk things through, we will figure it out together. And we do learn and we make mistakes. And that is normal. Like, no one's perfect. You know, even I does don't put that. But, you know, we all make mistakes. And we learn from them and we don't get it right all the time, but it's that self-awareness, that self-reflection that helps us know how we might do things differently next time.
It's also a real testament to your culture, though, because you quite clearly got a culture of where it is safe to make mistakes and see them as learning opportunities where you won't be penalized, you will be encouraged to succeed. And a lot of organizations don't have that. I hope that they do continue to work towards that. But it goes back to that safety and knowing as a manager that I will be supported by the organization to grow. And that does potentially mean that there will be mistakes along the way. How have you found people when they've moved into managerial roles, especially the middle managers, the balance between their new responsibility, but also not overwhelming them?
Yeah, that is a big challenge. And I recently read a statistic that said 54% of managers suffer from burnout because they are experiencing those additional stresses and those responsibilities. And I think the key thing is taking it at a pace that feels comfortable for them. And it goes back again to those training programs, which are great to invest in, but it's a lot of information and it's really about layering on those experiences at a pace where they're learning and it doesn't feel overwhelming. And it's like, okay, let's take this one thing and let's focus on that. And it's really about, for me, making really small practical things that you can apply in your job in a day-to-day basis. So like fast and frequent feedback. How can you make it like a small thing so it's not another thing to do on your to-do list? Like, oh, let's tick off, give some good feedback. You know, one-to-ones, how can you make the slight shift of going from just a status update to helping create clarity or removing roadblocks? If it's career growth, how can you create a plan and then just have a check-in and a framework that's really small and practical? And I think it is just about those smaller steps that people build on over time, because I agree with you. A lot of it comes from experience. You can't teach these things. You can't give them hundreds of frameworks. Like, oh, let me just remember what framework I need to pull out for this specific scenario. So I think it's about taking it as a slower pace and just building on the things that they experience.
And sometimes it can feel like a mountain, but I really love the examples that you've given around those small bites that we can do. And I think sometimes if we sit back and actually look at, okay, as a manager, how can I support the team? But also, the best managers are building great leaders,
Yes.
and they're already making those steps in the meantime that makes them better leaders.
Yeah.
At the same time, like they know that it's no longer just about them, it's about those that are in their care and how can they get the most out of them. I'm interested to know, so with people who progress to a managerial, to a middle management position, do you have any succession planning examples or early identifiers for the progression route for our next leaders?
So, yes. So, there are three things we expect from our managers: care, clarity, and coach. So, care is about caring about them personally,
Mm-hmm.
helping them to find success, helping them to win. Clarity is creating that clarity around performance, around expectations, and their responsibilities, is helping them to understand how they're doing and how to aim higher. And coaching is helping them to grow. It's coaching them through navigating challenges. It's coaching them through feedback and self-reflection. So those are the three things that we look for in our managers. So we start to identify the behaviors and traits of people within the team
Mm-hmm.
who might make good managers. So things like, how are they showing up for the team, for other junior team members? Are they sharing their knowledge? How do they teach? Are they putting their hand up for opportunities? Are they demonstrating a level of self-awareness? Do they care about the team rather than just them? Are they self-coaching? So one of the things we encourage overall in our culture is self-coaching and reframing. So if we start to develop coaching behaviors for everyone, like when they've got a challenge or when they're thinking about their career, asking those self-coaching questions, we're building the foundations of things we want our managers to do. Because if
Mm-hmm.
they're already doing it for themselves, then the aim is that they can then do that for the team. So we start to look out of people who might identify those things. Then it's about, there might not always be the position for a manager at that point. So if you've identified the individuals who might show those things you're looking for, how can you create opportunities that can help them nurture those skills? So, for example, can they get involved with onboarding of a new team member? Can you help them, or can they help create the plans or show them around or help them understand the new systems, the new processes? And I think for us, it's about finding those moments where they can start to develop those skills. And we haven't done it yet, but I'm a big fan of having the different tracks for individual contributors and managers.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I am a big believer that everyone has different strengths. Not everyone is going to be an amazing people manager, and that is okay. And I think it's about showing people that progression comes in all different forms. For
Mm-hmm.
some, they might be more entrepreneurial. For others, they might be more operational or more innovative. And that's something I really want to build on, is having those different paths, because I read a similar meme to what you were saying. Meme, not meme, but a similar post where it said, becoming a manager is not progression, it's a whole career change.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a completely different skill set. Like, knowing how to delegate and delegate well, it seems simple. Oh, I'll just tell this person what
There's
to
nothing simple
do.
about it.
Yeah, nothing simple. How do I give feedback that doesn't diminish someone's confidence or is clear? There are so many different skills that a manager needs to have. And that's what we try and look out for in our team. Like, are they showing those things?
I've not heard of a process like that with the 3 Cs. I'm thinking out loud now and saying it, it makes total sense. And I can see how that's also really inspiring for your people to know, here are the markers of what a great manager looks like here at the company, and here is what I can start to do in those micro moments every day to build towards that. Because I completely agree. When we become middle managers, having difficult conversations, delivering feedback, receiving feedback, especially upward feedback, they can sting. They're hard. There's nothing soft about them with soft skills that people talk.
Soft skills is not a word.
No,
They are essential skills.
fundamental, completely agree. And more often than not, we learn from our own experience. But with what you're saying, those 3 Cs are the really early identifiers. And I'm really impressed by them, being completely honest. For those 3 Cs, how do you keep track of the team members who you're identifying that are showing those particular skills and traits? How do you keep the momentum with them in advance of progression?
So again, it goes back to really thinking about the opportunities that will help them nurture those skills, because there are opportunities to do them. So as an example, our career framework is completely transferable skills by level, because it doesn't matter what level you're or whatever role you're in, a communication skill is a communication skill. It just might be applied differently into the context of your role. So for our managers, it's very similar. So how can they develop that skill in the opportunities that they have? And one of the things we make sure is in their career plan, or their growth plan is what we call it, is that those opportunities are linked back to them transitioning to become a manager. Because again, often what you might see is a growth plan with some objectives, and you're like, well, how's that, got anything to do with what I want to do over there?
Yeah.
And I think it's specifically calling that out. So great that you are aspiring to be a manager. So let's think about how we can start to develop the skill of giving feedback, or develop the skill of delegating. Perhaps you're going to delegate to another exec on the team. And it's being really clear and connecting those things for people, because again, that's a skill you need to have in a manager, is connecting the dots. So if you're doing that for them, then hopefully they will role model that in their role.
Such a key point. It goes back to the clarity and that connection is so, yeah, actually, when you say it now, I think that's where an underrated skill of being a middle manager comes in. Can you build that connection? Because often being a middle manager, you are the bridge between the senior leadership goals and then the frontline execution team on the ground. So how can you start to build that connection where it's then super clear to your team members for the wider organization? And I find sometimes that there's a disconnect with that. It's not prioritized.
Yeah, and it's so hard because we
Agreed.
talk a lot about purpose.
Yes.
And if you're a middle manager, it's like, how can I help this person create purpose in their role? Because they're here to do their job.
Yeah.
And actually, as a senior leader, you might be able to have more tangible elements of creating purpose because you're setting the vision, you're inspiring people, and they're coming on that journey. As a middle manager, how can you create that purpose of like, oh yeah, do your job well and go home and give yourself a pat on the back? And I think it's, like you say, it's one of those underrated skills of like connecting the dots and being able to see the dots in the first place.
Do you have any examples of when your middle managers have created the most impact for their team?
So most recently, I would say the growth conversations. So I think I mentioned it before, like in our employee experience survey, it probably wasn't an area we were scoring
Mm-hmm.
the highest on. And then our most recent, so we made some changes. We spent a lot of time nurturing the managers to have these impactful and help or useful growth conversations. And then we did a check-in pulse survey with the team to see whether those changes are having impact.
Mm-hmm.
And they are. And we've seen that through the retention of our team, the excitement that they have, the ambitions that they have. And I think one of the key things with that is understanding that everyone is an individual and they all have different paths. So what your path might have been to get to where you are as a manager might not be what your team want to do. And how do you support them? You're suddenly responsible for their growth and you only know the road you've taken to get there. And I think that is where we're having the most impact, is with having those sessions with managers, with reviewing growth plans, helping them to have those impactful conversations, because people's growth plans are, that's what people are motivated by and inspired by. And that's where we've seen a real big increase in the satisfaction from our team.
That's amazing. And often it's such a shame, but once you get to that middle management layer, you're even more less likely to get any sort of investment in yourself, in your personal growth for your career and development, which is such a shame to see. But it's really amazing to hear how much of a priority you are putting on your managers as part of your people strategy, which I think is a huge testament to all the success that you've had at Tomorrow. I have one final question for you today, which is around you. And it's quite a reflective question. And it's talking about, what is one piece of advice that you would give your younger self? So let's think back actually to you've graduated from your history degree. You speak to the career advisor talking about HR. You land your first role, which isn't in HR, but you're still on that journey. What is one piece of advice you would give your younger self?
Oh, I would say don't underestimate the value of bringing a different perspective to the conversation. I think for a really long time, I was like, well, why would they want to hear from me or what I think? And actually, now I see the power in having different perspectives and that being a key to unlocking people's blind spots. And yeah, just use your voice for good. It's better to say something than not say something and, kick yourself and be like, why didn't I say something at the time?
I can relate to that. I always walk away and I'm like, oh, I should have said that. But diverse thought, diverse perspective is one of the best ways that we can grow. And I completely agree. Not being scared to share versatility is something that each of us could all take inspiration from. Thank you so much for coming on today's episode. I've loved the conversation, and I know that so many of our listeners who have middle managers and are struggling to put in the necessary measures to build high performance within them will absolutely love this episode. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.